Jake Miller stood in the cramped dormitory room, staring at the graduation certificate in his hands. 18 years old and fresh out of Earth's Colonial Academy, he could barely believe he had made it through the intense 3-year program. The certificate meant he was now qualified to work on deep space vessels as a junior navigator. His dream of exploring the stars was finally within reach. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Jake opened it to find his grandfather, Admiral Robert Miller, standing in the hallway. The old man's weathered face showed pride mixed with something else Jake could not quite identify. "Congratulations, Jake," Robert said, stepping into the small room. "I wanted to give you something before you ship out tomorrow." Jake watched as his grandfather reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. The box looked ancient, its surface worn smooth by countless hands over many years. "This belonged to your great-grandmother, Helen," Robert explained, holding the box carefully. "She found it during one of humanity's first deep space exploration missions back, when we were just learning to travel beyond our solar system." Jake took the box with both hands. It felt heavier than it looked. When he opened it, his breath caught in his throat. Inside was a pendant, unlike anything he had ever seen. The pendant was made of some kind of crystal that seemed to glow with its own inner light. The crystal was perfectly clear, but somehow gave off a soft blue radiance that pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. "What is it?" Jake asked, lifting the pendant by its simple silver chain. Robert shook his head slowly. "Nobody knows for sure. Helen claimed she found it floating in space near an asteroid field. She said it called to her somehow. The scientists at the time could not identify the material or explain how it produced that light. They eventually gave up trying to study it and let her keep it." Jake held the pendant up to the light. The crystal was about the size of his thumb, cut in a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change as he looked at it from different angles. The blue glow pulsed steadily, warm against his palm. "Helen passed it down to my father, and he gave it to me when I joined the space service," Robert continued. "I carried it with me through 40 years of deep space missions. Never could figure out what it was, but it always seemed to bring me luck. Maybe it will do the same for you." Jake fastened the chain around his neck. The moment the pendant touched his chest, he felt a strange tingling sensation, as if tiny electric currents were running through his body. The feeling passed quickly, but it left him with an odd sense of anticipation, as if something important was about to happen. "Thank you, Grandpa," Jake said sincerely. "I will take good care of it." Robert smiled and squeezed Jake's shoulder. "I know you will, son. Make us proud out there." The next morning, Jake reported to the spaceport where the merchant vessel New Horizon waited. The ship was not particularly impressive to look at, a standard cargo hauler designed for long-distance freight runs to the outer colonies, but to Jake, it represented adventure and freedom. Captain Tom Harris was a gruff man in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the galaxy's darker corners. He looked Jake up and down when the young man reported for duty. "So, you're my new navigator," Harris said. "Hope you're better than the last one. He got us lost in the Kepler system and cost us 3 days." "I won't let you down, sir," Jake replied confidently. Harris introduced him to the rest of the crew. Chief Engineer Lisa Wong was a woman in her 30s with quick hands and an even quicker mind. She had been keeping aging starships running for over a decade and could fix almost anything with spare parts and determination. Security Officer Mike Johnson was built like a wall, tall, broad, and solid. His job was to protect the ship and crew from pirates and other dangers they might encounter in the lawless outer territories. Despite his intimidating appearance, he had a friendly smile and welcomed Jake warmly. The New Horizon launched on schedule, bound for the mining colonies in the Centauri system. Their cargo hold was filled with supplies the colonists needed: food, medical equipment, and replacement parts for their mining machinery. It was routine work, the kind of run Jake would be making many times in the months ahead. For the first few days of the journey, everything went smoothly. Jake settled into his duties, learning the ship's navigation systems and plotting their course through hyperspace. The pendant remained hidden beneath his uniform, its gentle glow barely visible through the fabric. On the fourth day, something changed. Jake was running a routine sensor sweep when he noticed the pendant had begun to glow brighter. The blue light was now strong enough to see clearly through his shirt. He quickly checked to make sure no one was looking, then pulled the pendant out to examine it. The crystal was pulsing faster now, and the light had changed from soft blue to brilliant white. As Jake watched in amazement, thin beams of light began, shooting out from the crystal's faceted surface, creating complex patterns in the air around him. "What the hell is that?" came a voice from behind him. Jake spun around to see Captain Harris standing in the doorway, staring at the pendant with wide eyes. "It's just something my grandfather gave me," Jake said quickly, trying to tuck the pendant back under his shirt. But the light was too bright now to hide. Harris stepped closer, his expression shifting from surprise to concern. "That's not just some family heirloom, kid. That thing is giving off energy readings I've never seen before." Before Jake could respond, the ship's alarm began blaring. Lisa's voice came over the intercom, urgent and excited. "Captain, you need to see this. Our sensors are picking up some kind of massive anomaly in hyperspace. It's like nothing in our databases." Harris looked from Jake to the pendant, then back to Jake. The crystal was now so bright it hurt to look at directly, and Jake could feel it vibrating against his chest. "I think," Harris said slowly, "your pendant is reacting to whatever's out there." Jake felt his heart racing. His first deep space mission was supposed to be routine cargo delivery. Instead, he found himself holding an alien artifact that was apparently responding to something unknown in the depths of space. "Captain," Jake said, his voice steady despite his excitement, "I think we need to investigate." Harris studied the young man's face for a long moment. Then he smiled grimly and headed for the bridge. "All right, kid. Let's see what your family heirloom wants to show us." The New Horizon changed course, following the pendant's guidance toward whatever was waiting for them in the dark between the stars. Jake had no idea that this decision would change not just his life, but the fate of the entire galaxy. The New Horizon dropped out of hyperspace with a violent shudder that sent Jake stumbling against the navigation console. Emergency lights flickered on throughout the bridge as the ship's systems struggled to adjust to whatever they had found. "Report," Captain Harris barked, gripping his chair as the ship continued to shake. "We're in normal space, but barely." Lisa's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. "Whatever that thing is out there, it's playing havoc with our power systems." Jake looked at his pendant. The crystal was now blazing with white light so intense he had to shield his eyes. The geometric patterns carved into its surface seemed to be moving, rotating, and shifting in ways that should have been impossible for solid crystal. "There," Mike Johnson said, pointing at the main view screen. "Dead ahead." Jake turned to look and felt his breath catch in his throat. Floating in the darkness before them was a ship unlike anything he had ever seen. It was massive, easily 10 times the size of the New Horizon, but its design was completely alien. The hull was smooth and curved, made of some dark metal that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Strange symbols were carved along its length, glowing with the same blue light that had first appeared in Jake's pendant. "That's not human," Harris said quietly. "Not like any alien ship in our databases either." "Captain," Lisa called over the intercom, "I'm reading massive energy signatures from that vessel, but they're old. Really old. Like this thing has been drifting out here for centuries." Jake stepped closer to the view screen, his pendant pulling gently forward as if drawn to the alien ship. "I think it's some kind of prison transport," he said, studying the vessel's structure. "Look at those reinforced sections along the hull, and those are holding cells, not crew quarters." Harris looked at him sharply. How can you tell that just by looking? Jake frowned. He was not sure how he knew, but somehow the ship's purpose was clear to him. The pendant seemed to be feeding information directly into his mind, showing him things he should not have been able to understand. I don't know, Jake admitted. No. The captain studied Jake's face for a moment, then made his decision. Lisa, Mike, suit up. We're going aboard. Jake, you're coming with us. Sir, is that wise? Mike asked. We don't know what's over there. No, but that pendant does, Harris replied, and right now, it's our only guide. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself in a spacesuit, floating in the void between the two ships. The alien vessel looked even more intimidating up close. Its hull was covered in scratches and impact marks, evidence of some long-ago battle. The symbols carved into its surface pulsed with that familiar blue light, seeming to welcome them forward. They entered through what appeared to be a docking bay. The moment they stepped inside, Jake's pendant flared so brightly that it lit up the entire chamber. Emergency lighting flickered on throughout the ship, as if their presence had awakened sleeping systems. Artificial gravity is working, Lisa observed, checking her instruments. Atmosphere is breathable too, though I'd recommend keeping our suits sealed until we know more. The corridors beyond the docking bay were wide and tall, clearly designed for beings larger than humans. The walls were lined with what could only be cells, dozens of them stretching as far as they could see. Most stood empty, their doors hanging open, but some still contained the remains of long-dead aliens. This definitely was a prison ship, Mike said, his voice tense over the radio. Question is, what were they transporting? Jake led them deeper, into the ship, following the pull of his pendant. The crystal was guiding him toward something specific, something important. They passed through corridor after corridor, all lined with the same empty cells. Finally, they reached what appeared to be the ship's central chamber. It was a vast room with a domed ceiling covered in the same glowing symbols. But what caught their attention immediately was the single stasis pod standing in the center of the room. Unlike all the other cells they had seen, this one was still active. Lights blinked steadily along its surface, and a soft humming sound filled the air. Through the transparent front panel, they could see a figure inside. Is that still alive? Lisa whispered. Jake approached the pod slowly, his pendant now so bright it was like carrying a small sun. As he got closer, he could see the figure more clearly. It was humanoid, but clearly not human. The being was female, with pale skin marked by intricate patterns that seemed to shift and move. Her hair was long and silver, and even in stasis, there was something powerful about her presence. Her hands ended in claws that looked like they could cut through steel. Her muscles were lean, but clearly designed for incredible strength and speed. This was a warrior, Jake realized. A predator built for combat. Jake, Harris called out. Step back from that thing. But Jake could not move. His pendant was pulling him forward, and he could feel something else now, a presence in his mind that was not his own. The being in the pod was somehow aware of him, even in stasis. Suddenly, the pendant blazed with light so intense that all four humans had to look away. When they could see again, the stasis pod was opening with a soft hiss of escaping gas. The being inside stirred, her eyes opening slowly. They glowed with an inner fire, pupils contracting as they adjusted to the light. When she sat up, her movements were fluid and graceful, like a great cat stretching after sleep. She looked at each of them in turn, her expression wary and confused. When her gaze fell on Jake and his pendant, her eyes widened with what looked like recognition. She spoke then, her voice rich and musical, but in a language none of them recognized. The sounds were complex, with clicks and harmonics that human throats could not produce. Jake felt his pendant grow warm against his chest. Suddenly, he could understand her words as clearly as if she had spoken English. "Who awakens me?" she said. "Who carries the light of my people?" Jake stepped forward, somehow knowing this was safe. "My name is Jake Miller. This pendant belonged to my great-grandmother." The being studied his face intently. "Miller?" she repeated, the words strange in her accent. "Yes, I remember that name. Your bloodline carries old promises." She stood. Then, and Jake was struck by how tall she was, nearly 7 feet, with the fluid grace of a natural predator. Despite her alien features, there was something magnificent about her. "I am Kira of the Apex," she said, "and if you carry that pendant, then the time has come for old debts to be paid." Jake felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. Whatever he had awakened, whatever ancient promises his family line carried, there was no turning back now. The universe had just become a much more dangerous place. The journey back to the new horizon was tense. Kira moved with the fluid grace of a predator, her claws clicking softly against the metal floors as she walked. Captain Harris and Mike kept their hands near their weapons, though Jake suspected their guns would be useless against someone like her. "She's been in that pod for how long?" Lisa whispered to Jake as they made their way through the ship's corridors. Jake looked at Kira, who was examining the alien symbols on the walls with a sad expression. "Over 1,000 years, according to what she told me." 1,000 years, Harris repeated quietly. "And she just wakes up like it was yesterday." Once they were safely aboard the New Horizon, Harris called for an emergency meeting in the ship's small conference room. Kira sat at one end of the table, her tall frame making the human-sized furniture look like toys. Her glowing eyes watched each of them carefully, as if she was deciding whether they were threats or allies. "All right," Harris said, leaning forward. "I think we all deserve some answers, starting with what exactly you are." Kira was quiet for a moment, then began to speak. Jake's pendant continued to translate her words, making the conversation possible. "I am Apex," she said simply. "My people were the guardians of this galaxy long before your species learned to leave your homeworld. We protected the weak and fought against the darkness that would consume all life." "Protected from what?" Jake asked. Kira's expression grew darker. "There are things in the deep spaces between stars that hunger for life itself. Ancient evils that would turn entire worlds into empty shells. My people stood against them for thousands of years." Mike shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "So what happened? Where are the rest of your people?" "Betrayed," Kira said, her voice filled with old pain. "The very species we protected grew jealous of our strength. They feared us more than the darkness we fought. So they joined together and turned against us." She stood and walked to the small window, looking out at the alien prison ship floating in space. "They hunted us down, one by one. Those they could not kill, they imprisoned. I was among the last to fall." Jake felt a strange connection to her pain, as if the pendant was letting him share her emotions. "But you said you recognized my family name? How is that possible?" Kira turned back to him, and for the first time, her expression softened. "Because your people were different. Long ago, when humanity first ventured into deep space, they met my kind. Most aliens feared us or hated us, but humans were curious." She moved closer to Jake, her eyes fixed on the pendant around his neck. "One human in particular became very special to us. His name was Alex Miller. He was your ancestor." Jake's eyes widened. "My great-great-grandfather was named Alex, but he died in a deep space accident. That's what our family records say." "Not an accident," Kira said quietly. "Alex died defending me when the betrayal began. But before he died, we formed a bond that had never existed between human and Apex before." Jake felt the pendant growing, warm against his chest. "What kind of bond?" Alex was changed by his time with us. Our scientists gave him gifts, enhanced reflexes, improved thinking, longer life. But more than that, they changed something in his blood, something that would be passed down to his children and their children. Lisa looked fascinated despite the danger. Genetic modifications that could be inherited? Yes, Kira nodded. Alex knew that one day someone from his family line would find me. The pendant was designed to guide his descendants to the right place at the right time. Jake looked down at the glowing crystal. You mean this whole thing was planned? Not planned, Kira corrected. Hoped for. Alex made a promise before he died. He said that humans would not abandon us like the others did. He said his family would remember. Captain Harris had been listening quietly, but now he spoke up. Assuming all of this is true, what happens now? We can't exactly drop you off at the nearest space station. Before Kira could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. Lisa jumped up and ran to the nearest control panel. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, she announced, her face pale. Big ones, and they're not friendly. Harris rushed to the bridge, with the others following. The main screen showed 6 large warships surrounding them, their hull designs matching several different alien species. This is Hegemony Command Ship Righteous, came a voice over the communication system. You are harboring a dangerous criminal. Surrender the Apex immediately, and you will not be harmed. Jake looked at Kira, who had gone completely still. Her eyes were now blazing with inner fire, and he could see her muscles tensing for action. They found us quickly, she said. The same alliance that betrayed my people still exists. They call themselves the Hegemony now. Can we outrun them? Harris asked Lisa. Not a chance, she replied. Those are military vessels. We're just a cargo ship. The Hegemony commander spoke again. You have 2 minutes to comply. After that, we will board your vessel by force. Jake felt something changing inside him as he looked at the alien ships on the screen. His heart was beating faster, but not from fear. The pendant was growing hot against his chest, and his vision seemed sharper somehow. He could see tactical possibilities that had not been obvious before. We fight, he said suddenly. Everyone turned to stare at him. Jake, Harris said carefully, we're outnumbered 6-1. Not if Kira helps us, Jake replied. He turned to the Apex warrior. You said my ancestor died defending you. Well, I'm willing to live defending you, but I need to know. Are you really as dangerous as they think you are? Kira smiled then, and for the first time, Jake saw her true nature. She was not just a warrior. She was a force of nature, a living weapon shaped by evolution and training into something beyond human understanding. Young Miller, she said, her voice filled with deadly promise, you are about to learn why they call us Apex. The pendant around Jake's neck blazed with light, and he felt power flowing through his veins that he had never known before. The genetic gifts that Alex had passed down were finally awakening, triggered by the presence of the one person they were meant to serve. The Hegemony ships began moving closer, but Jake was no longer afraid. He had found his purpose at last. The first Hegemony ship opened fire without warning. Energy beams struck the New Horizons' shields, sending sparks flying across the bridge. Jake felt the ship shudder beneath his feet as Captain Harris shouted orders to his crew. Lisa, get us. More power to the shields! Harris yelled over the noise of the attack. Mike, return fire with everything we have! Our weapons are no match for theirs, Mike replied, his hands flying over the weapons console. We might as well be throwing rocks. Jake watched the tactical display, his mind working faster than it ever had before. The pendant around his neck was blazing with white light, and he could see patterns in the enemy ship's movements that should have been impossible to predict. They're trying to disable our engines, he said suddenly. The lead ship is moving to our starboard side to block our escape route. Kira moved to stand beside him, her eyes studying the enemy formation. "The boy sees clearly," she said to Harris. "His blood awakens, but we need space to fight properly." "What do you mean?" Harris asked. Instead of answering, Kira headed for the door. "I go to show them what they have awakened." Before anyone could stop her, she was gone, moving through the ship with inhuman speed. Jake felt a pull to follow her, as if the pendant was guiding him toward something important. "Jake, stay on the bridge," Harris ordered, but Jake was already moving. He found Kira in the cargo bay, standing before the airlock that led to space. She had somehow found an environmental suit that fit her tall frame, though Jake noticed she had modified it to accommodate her claws. "You should not be here," she said without turning around. "This is too dangerous for someone so young." "I'm not staying behind," Jake replied firmly. "That pendant chose me for a reason. Maybe it's time. I found out why." Kira looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Very well, but stay close and do exactly as I say." They suited up quickly and entered the airlock. As they prepared to launch into space, Jake felt his heart pounding with excitement rather than fear. The genetic changes in his blood were making him stronger, faster, more aware of everything around him. The moment they launched from the new horizon, Jake saw Kira transform into something beyond human understanding. She moved through space like she was born to it, using small thruster bursts to propel herself toward the nearest hegemony ship with deadly precision. Jake followed, amazed at how natural the movement felt. His modified genetics were helping him keep up with someone who had been trained for space combat for centuries. The hegemony ship they approached was massive, its hull bristling with weapons. Jake expected them to target the ship's engines or weapon systems, but Kira had different plans. "We go for the bridge," she said over their suit radios. "Cut off the head and the body dies." They landed on the enemy ship's hull and began cutting through the outer armor with tools from their suits. Jake was surprised at how quickly they could work together, as if they had been partners for years instead of hours. Inside the ship, chaos erupted as alarms blared and alien crew members rushed to respond to the breach. Jake got his first look at the species that made up the hegemony, tall, thin beings with gray skin and large black eyes. They moved quickly but seemed panicked by the sudden attack. Kira was a force of destruction as she fought her way through the corridors. Her claws could cut through their armor like paper, and her speed made it impossible for them to target her effectively. Jake found himself moving with similar grace, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge energy blasts and strike back with precision he had never possessed before. "The bridge is through here," Kira said, indicating a heavily armored door. "But there will be many guards." "How many?" Jake asked. "Does it matter?" Kira replied with a fierce smile. They burst through the door together. The bridge was filled with alien officers, all turning in surprise as two figures in environmental suits appeared among them. The ship's captain, a being even taller than the others, pointed at them and shouted orders in a language Jake could not understand. But he did not need to understand their words to see their fear. These beings remembered what the Apex could do, and that terror made them clumsy and desperate. The battle was over in minutes. Kira moved like liquid lightning, disabling the ship's crew without killing them unnecessarily. Jake found himself fighting beside her with skills he had never learned, as if muscle memory from his ancestor Alex was guiding his actions. When the bridge was secure, Kira moved to the ship's communication system and began sending a message to the other hegemony vessels. "This is Kira of the Apex," she said, her voice carrying deadly authority. "You have awakened something that was meant to sleep. Withdraw now or face the consequences." The response came quickly from the lead ship. "We do not negotiate with criminals. Surrender or be destroyed." Jake watched as 3 more hegemony ships moved to attack positions around the new horizon. On the tactical display, he could see Captain Harris trying desperately to evade their weapons, but the cargo ship was simply too slow and underarmed. "They will destroy your friends," Kira said quietly. "Unless we stop them." Jake felt anger building inside him as he watched the enemy ships preparing to fire on his crew. These beings were willing to kill innocent people just to capture one person they feared. "Then we stopped them," he said, but as they prepared to leave the captured ship, Jake noticed something troubling on the long-range sensors. More ships were coming, a lot more. The hegemony had called for reinforcements. "Kira," he said, pointing at the display, "we have a bigger problem." She looked at the sensor readings and her expression grew grim. 20 ships. They mean to end this here and now. Jake felt the pendant growing hot against his chest again, and suddenly he knew what they had to do. "You said there was an Apex facility in the Void sector. How far?" 3 days at maximum speed," Kira replied. "But the Void sector is dangerous. There are things there that even the hegemony fears to face." "More dangerous than staying here?" Jake asked. Kira smiled grimly. "No. You learn quickly, young Miller. Your ancestor would be proud." They fought their way back to the New Horizon, leaving the hegemony ship disabled but not destroyed. As they docked with their own vessel, Jake could see the enemy reinforcements arriving in the distance. Captain Harris met them at the airlock, his face grim. "Jake, I'm sorry. Tom didn't make it. Took a direct hit to the engine room during the last attack." Jake felt a surge of grief and anger. Captain Harris had been a good man, and he had died protecting them. The weight of command was suddenly on Jake's young shoulders, but the pendant's power gave him the strength to bear it. "Then we make his sacrifice count," Jake said. "Set course for the Void sector. We're going to find the rest of Kira's people." As the New Horizon jumped to hyperspace, Jake could feel the hegemony fleet following behind them. The hunt had truly begun, and there would be no turning back now. The Void sector was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. Space itself seemed darker here, as if the stars were being swallowed by some invisible force. Strange energy readings flickered across their sensors, and the New Horizon shuddered occasionally as they passed through pockets of twisted space-time. "I don't like this place," Mike said, checking his instruments for the 10th time in an hour. "My readings keep changing. It's like space itself is broken here." Jake stood beside Kira at the navigation console, watching her guide them through the dangerous region. His pendant had been glowing steadily since they entered the Void sector, providing some kind of protection against the worst effects of the distorted space. "Your ancestor and I came through here once before," Kira said quietly. "Alex was the first human to see the Apex home station. He was amazed by what we had built." "Tell me about him," Jake said. "He was changing more each day, becoming something new, and he wanted to understand the man whose genetic gifts were awakening inside him." Kira smiled at the memory. Alex was curious about everything. He asked more questions than 10 scholars, but he was also brave and loyal. When the hegemony began their betrayal, he stood with us, even though it meant abandoning his own people. Why did he do that? Because he understood that some things are more important than the safety of one person or even one species. The darkness we fought threatens all life in the galaxy. Alex saw that truth and chose to stand against it. Their conversation was interrupted by Lisa's voice over the intercom. "Jake, you need to see this. We're picking up massive objects on long-range sensors." Jake hurried to the bridge, where the main screen showed a graveyard of ships floating in the darkness. But these were not ordinary vessels. They were enormous, with designs that hurt to look at directly. The hulls seemed to absorb light, and strange symbols covered their surfaces in patterns that made Jake's eyes water. "Shadow Fleet," Kira said, her voice filled with old fear. "The automated ships of the Devourers. They are still here, still, following their ancient commands." "Devourers?" Jake asked. The darkness I told you about, they consumed entire worlds, turning all life into energy to feed their hunger. My people fought them for thousands of years before finally driving them back into the deep void. Jake studied the dead ships on the screen. Even inactive, they radiated menace. Are they still dangerous? Very much so, Kira replied. They are programmed to destroy all life they encounter. Even after all this time, they will respond to our presence. As if summoned by her words, lights began flickering on throughout the shadow ships. Jake watched in horror as the massive vessels began to move, turning toward the new horizon with deadly purpose. Evasive maneuvers, Jake ordered, taking command naturally. The genetic memories from Alex were guiding him, showing him tactical patterns that had been learned in battles fought centuries ago. Lisa pushed their engines to maximum power, but the shadow ships were faster than anything that size should have been. Energy beams lanced out from their weapons, missing the new horizon by mere meters. We can't outrun them, Mike reported, and our weapons won't even scratch their hulls. Jake felt the pendant burning against his chest, and suddenly he understood. Kira, can you interface with their systems? You said they're automated. Yes, but it would require getting very close. Too close. Do it, Jake said. I'll get us there. What followed was the most dangerous flying of Jake's life. Using reflexes and instincts he had never possessed before, he guided the new horizon through the Shadow Fleet's formation. Kira worked at a console she had somehow modified to interface with Apex technology, her claws dancing over controls that should not have existed on a human ship. The shadow ships fired constantly, their weapons creating a deadly web of energy around the small cargo vessel. Jake dodged and weaved through the attacks, his enhanced mind calculating trajectories and possibilities faster than any computer. Got it, Kira announced suddenly. I've accessed their command protocols. Sending. Shutdown sequence now. One by one, the shadow ships went dark and still, returning to their ancient sleep. Jake felt exhaustion wash over him as the adrenaline faded, but they had made it through. The facility is just ahead, Kira said, pointing to a structure that appeared on their sensors. The Apex station was beautiful in its alien way. It was built into an asteroid, with graceful spires and domes extending from the rocky surface, but Jake could see that much of it was dark and abandoned. They docked at what appeared to be a reception bay. The station's systems recognized Kira's presence and activated automatically, providing atmosphere and gravity for their arrival. Inside, they found the station largely empty but still functional. Kira led them through corridors filled with technology. That seemed like magic to human eyes. Finally, they reached a chamber containing dozens of stasis pods similar to the one they had found Kira in. My people, she said softly. The survivors of the betrayal. Jake watched as Kira began activating the pods one by one. The first to awaken was a massive male apex with scars covering his arms and face. When he saw Kira, his expression shifted, from confusion to joy. Kira, he said in the Apex language. You live. We thought all hope was lost. This is Rex, Kira said to Jake. He was our war leader during the final battles. The next to awaken was a female Apex with intricate tattoos, covering her skin and tools Jake did not recognize attached to her belt. I am Anna, she said, speaking English with a thick accent. I study the sciences of war and peace. One by one, the surviving Apex awakened. There were only 12 of them left from what had once been a great civilization. But Jake could see the relief in their eyes as they looked at Kira and realized they were no longer alone. How did you find us? Rex asked through Kira's translation. Jake held up the pendant, which was glowing brightly in the presence of so many Apex. This belonged to Alex Miller. I'm his descendant. The reaction was immediate. All the Apex warriors turned to stare at Jake with expressions of wonder and respect. Anna stepped forward and examined him closely. Yes, she said finally. I can see Alex's modifications in his blood, but they have evolved, become something new. You are not fully human anymore, young Miller. What am I becoming? Jake asked. Something that has never existed before, Anna replied. Human adaptability combined with apex enhancement. You are the bridge between our species that Alex always believed was possible. Their reunion was interrupted by alarms echoing through the station. Rex checked the sensor displays and growled low in his throat. Hegemony Fleet, he announced. They have found us. Jake looked at the tactical display. 20 ships were approaching. The station, led by vessels he recognized from their earlier encounter. The hegemony had followed them through the void sector despite the dangers. How many ships do we have here? Jake asked. 3 fighters and 1 heavy cruiser, Anna replied. All functional, but we are still outnumbered. Jake felt the pendant's power flowing through him, and suddenly he could see the solution. We don't fight them here. We lead them into the Shadow Fleet. Kira smiled fiercely. You think like Alex. Yes, we can use the Devourer's ships against our enemies. But the Shadow Fleet is dormant, Rex pointed out. Then we wake them up, Jake said. Anna, can you modify their programming to target the hegemony instead of us? Anna's eyes lit up with understanding. Yes, if we can access their central command node. But someone would have to get very close to the flagship. I'll do it, Jake said. We'll do it, Kira corrected. You are not ready to face such danger alone. As the hegemony fleet drew closer, the Apex began preparing their ships for launch. Jake felt a sense of destiny settling over him. This was what the pendant had been guiding him toward, not just rescuing Kira, but awakening the guardians the galaxy needed. The final battle was about to begin. The Apex fighter ship was unlike anything Jake had ever flown. It responded to his thoughts as much as his hands, the controls seeming to meld with his enhanced nervous system. Beside him, Kira worked at the weapons console, her claws dancing, over controls that pulsed with the same blue energy as his pendant. The hegemony flagship is the largest vessel in their formation, Kira said, pointing to the tactical display. If we can reach its central computer core, Anna's virus will spread to their entire fleet. Jake nodded, his eyes fixed on the approaching enemy ships. The hegemony had brought everything they had, cruisers, destroyers, even some ship types he did not recognize. They were taking no chances this time. Jake, came Rex's voice over the communication system. We're beginning our attack run. Try to stay alive long enough to complete the mission. Same to you, Jake replied, then switched to a private channel. Lisa, Mike, are you ready back there? His human friends were in the fighter's rear compartment, monitoring the virus that Anna had programmed. They had insisted on coming along despite the danger. Ready as we'll ever be, Lisa replied. Though I still think this plan is crazy. All the best plans are, Jake said, and felt Kira's agreement through their growing mental connection. Battle began as the Apex ships engaged the outer edge of the hegemony formation. Jake watched on his sensors as Rex and the other warriors demonstrated why their people had once been the most feared fighters in the galaxy. Even outnumbered, they carved through the enemy formation with deadly precision. But Jake and Kira had a different mission. While the main battle raged, they slipped around the edge of the combat zone, heading for the flagship that hung back behind the other ships. Incoming fighters! Kira announced as enemy ships peeled off to intercept them. Jake threw their ship into a series of maneuvers that would have been impossible in any normal vessel. The Apex fighter twisted and spun through space, its advanced engines allowing it to change direction in ways that defied human understanding of physics. Kira's weapons found their targets with deadly accuracy. Each shot was perfectly placed to disable rather than destroy. She was conserving energy for the main target. There, Jake said as the flagship grew large on their screen. The docking bay is open. Too obvious, Kira replied. They want us to come that way. We go through the hull instead. Jake brought them in close to the massive ship's surface, dodging defensive fire from its point defense systems. Kira used the fighter's cutting beam to slice through the armored hull, creating an opening just large enough for their ship. Inside the enemy vessel, they encountered heavy resistance. Hegemony troops filled the corridors, firing energy weapons that lit up the darkness with deadly light. But Jake found himself moving with inhuman speed and grace, the genetic gifts from Alex fully awakened now. "The computer core is 3 levels down," Kira said, checking the ship's layout on her scanner. "But Jake, there's something else. I'm detecting massive energy readings from the ship's command deck." "What kind of energy?" "Apex technology. They have something of ours aboard this ship." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. What could they have taken? Instead of answering, Kira led him toward the command deck. They fought their way through corridor after corridor, leaving disabled hegemony troops in their wake. When they finally reached the bridge, Jake gasped at what he saw. Standing in the center of the command deck was another Apex warrior, but this one was different. His skin was pale and his eyes were empty, showing no recognition when he looked at Kira. Cables and wires connected him to the ship's systems, and Jake could see that parts of his body had been replaced with mechanical components. "Marcus," Kira whispered, her voice filled with pain. "What have they done to you?" The corrupted Apex warrior turned toward them, his movements jerky and unnatural. When he spoke, his voice was flat and emotionless. "Kira of the Storm Riders, you are to surrender for processing." Jake felt Kira's shock through their connection. "Storm Riders?" "That was my unit during the war," she said quietly. "Marcus was my second in command. But Jake, there's something I haven't told you. Something important." "What?" Kira looked at him with an expression of mingled pride and sorrow. "I am not just any Apex warrior. I am Kira Stormbringer, the commander who led our people against the Devourers. The hegemony didn't imprison me because I was dangerous. They imprisoned me because I was the most dangerous." Jake stared at her as the truth sank in. The being he had rescued was not just a warrior. She was a legend. The universe's most dangerous Tigress, feared by enemies and revered by allies across the galaxy. "The Stormbringer," Marcus said, his corrupted mind recognizing the title. "You will submit to reconditioning." "Never," Kira replied, her voice carrying the authority that had once commanded armies. "Marcus, fight their programming. Remember who you were." The battle that followed was unlike anything Jake had ever witnessed. Kira moved like her namesake, a force of nature that could not be stopped or contained. But Marcus was strong too, enhanced by hegemony technology that made him faster and stronger than any normal Apex. Jake found himself fighting alongside the most legendary warrior in galactic history, his own enhanced abilities barely keeping up with the pace of combat. Together they began to overpower the corrupted Apex. "The virus!" Jake shouted to Lisa over the sounds of battle. "Upload it now." "Working on it," she replied, her hands flying over the portable computer they had brought. "But their security is fighting back." That was when Jake felt the pendant around his neck suddenly grow burning hot. Power flowed through him like nothing he had ever experienced, and he realized that this was the moment everything had been building toward. He reached out with his mind, using abilities he was only just discovering, and interfaced directly with the hegemony ship's computer systems. The virus that Anna had created merged with his consciousness, becoming something far more powerful than any simple program. Throughout the hegemony fleet, ships began shutting down as their computer systems were overwhelmed. But more than that, Jake was awakening something else. Hidden signals that reached out across the galaxy to human colonies that had been secretly prepared for this moment. On world after world, humans who carried the genetic modifications that Alex had helped design suddenly felt their abilities awakening. The hegemony had been so focused on stopping the Apex that they had never noticed humanity's true potential. "It's done," Jake said, feeling the virus spread through every enemy ship. "The fleet is disabled. Kira had managed to break through Marcus's programming, and Jake could see awareness returning to the other Apex's eyes. The corruption was lifting, leaving behind the warrior he had once been. "Commander," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder. "You found them. The humans Alex spoke of. They came back for us." "Yes," Kira said, looking at Jake with pride. "They kept their promise." On the main screen, they could see the Shadow Fleet, awakening as Jake's virus reached their ancient systems. But instead of attacking everything in sight, the Devourer ships were targeting only the hegemony vessels, following new programming that identified them as the primary threat. The battle was over in minutes. The hegemony fleet, caught between the awakened shadow ships and their own disabled systems, surrendered without firing another shot. "Jake," came Rex's voice over the communication system. "What did you do? I'm getting reports from across the galaxy. Human colonies are declaring independence. Ships are launching from a dozen worlds." Jake looked at Kira, understanding finally, dawning. "The pendant wasn't just a key to find you. It was a key to awaken all of us." "Alex's true gift," Kira agreed. "Not just the genetic modifications, but a network that would activate when the galaxy needed guardians again." As they stood together on the bridge of the defeated flagship, Jake realized that everything had changed. He was no longer just a young navigator on his first deep space mission. He had become the first of a new kind of being, part human, part Apex, and something entirely new. And beside him stood Kira Stormbringer, the universe's most dangerous Tigress, no longer imprisoned but free to protect the galaxy once again. The young cub had indeed brought back the Tigress, but in doing so, he had become something equally formidable. Together, they would face whatever darkness emerged from the void, ready to defend all life against the ancient evils that still lurked in the deep spaces between stars. The galaxy had guardians again, and this time, they would not be betrayed.